The city changed its breathing at 2 a.m. Clara Baptiste knew this rhythm intimately. She knew which sounds belonged and which ones didn't. Tonight, something was wrong. The streets were too still, the kind of quiet that made her shoulders tense and her eyes scan every shadow twice. She pulled her worn jacket tighter, her plastic grocery bag cutting into her palm as she crossed the broken intersection near Fletcher Street. This was survival territory.
Don't turn back.
Every person who lived here long enough learned the same lesson. Pay attention or pay the price. That's when she noticed the headlights. 3 sets of them, expensive vehicles idling in formation like predators circling prey. They weren't moving like normal traffic. They were positioning. Clara's pulse kicked up. Someone was about to get boxed in, and whoever it was didn't know it yet. Then she saw him. A man in a tailored charcoal suit, walking with the kind of confidence that came from never having to watch your back. His hands rested casually in his pockets, his stride measured and unhurried, as if danger was a concept that happened to other people. He had an elegant neck tattoo that snaked up from his collar. Intricate, deliberate, expensive. He didn't belong here. Not at this hour. Not alone. And he had no idea the 3 sedans were creating a kill box around him. Clara's grocery bag hit the pavement. Canned goods rolled across cracked concrete. She didn't stop to retrieve them. Her feet moved before her mind fully processed the decision, carrying her toward the stranger with desperate urgency. But before we find out if she survives the next 5 minutes, hit that subscribe button, because this story is about to take turns you won't see coming, and trust me, you don't want to miss what happens when a street-smart survivor meets the city's most dangerous man. Don't turn back. She spoke the words quickly, breathlessly, as she reached him. Not a shout, a command delivered in a fierce whisper. The man stopped walking. His body stilled with the precision of someone trained to assess threats instantly. When he turned his head slightly to look at her, Clara saw his eyes. Dark, sharp, calculating. They swept over her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Excuse me?" His voice was smooth, controlled, with a faint accent that shaped each syllable deliberately. 3 cars, Clara said, keeping her voice low and urgent. "They're closing in on you. If you look back now, they'll know you spotted them, and this ends badly for both of us." For a fraction of a second, something flickered across his composed expression, surprise, maybe even respect. His gaze sharpened, reading her face like she'd just spoken a language he didn't expect a stranger to know. "Walk with me," he said quietly. It wasn't a request. It was an instruction from someone used to being obeyed. Clara matched his stride immediately. Behind them, tires screeched against asphalt in perfect synchronization. 3 black sedans slammed to choreographed stops, their doors already opening before the vehicles fully halted. Men emerged with the fluid coordination of professionals, not street thugs. "You saw them before I did," the man said, his tone carrying genuine surprise. "No one sees things before I do." "I pay attention," Clara replied, keeping her voice steady despite her hammering heart. "It's how people like me stay breathing in neighborhoods like this." "People like you." He repeated the phrase with curiosity, not judgment.
Poor.
Invisible. The kind of person who learns to read danger, because missing it once means you don't get a second chance. He studied her from the corner of his eye, taking in her scuffed sneakers, the careful alertness in her posture, the way her eyes constantly tracked movement around them. She wasn't what he'd expected. Most people who approached him wanted something: money, protection, an angle. This girl had risked herself to warn a complete stranger. "You're not wrong about the danger," he said finally. "But those men didn't stop for you. They stopped for me." Clara's mind raced through the implications. Only 2 types of men drew this level of coordinated violence: powerful politicians or powerful criminals. And no politician walked alone through her neighborhood at 2 a.m. "Who are you?" she asked, though part of her wasn't certain she wanted the answer. He didn't respond immediately. The men from the sedans began moving toward them with predatory patience, fanning out to cover multiple angles. These weren't amateurs. This was an execution team. "Stay close," he said, his hand hovering near the small of her back without quite touching her. But Clara shook her head, her survival instincts overriding protocol. "You're being hunted," she whispered quickly. "And whoever they are, they planned this carefully. That means there's a trap stage somewhere on this street." He studied her with sudden intensity, watching her think through the tactical situation. Something shifted in his expression, recognition of a mind that worked like his own, just sharpened by different circumstances. "Where's the trap?" he asked, trusting her assessment completely. Clara pointed discreetly toward the left. "That construction barrier wasn't there yesterday when I walked this route. And the alley they're trying to hurt us toward? Dead end. I learned that the hard way when I was 16 and running from different trouble." His lips curved slightly, not quite a smile, but acknowledgement of expertise when he encountered it. "You're wasted in this neighborhood." "No," Clara corrected, her chin lifting with quiet pride despite the danger. "This neighborhood taught me everything that's keeping us alive right now." The execution team continued their approach, moving with the casual confidence of predators who believed the outcome was certain. The man beside her adjusted his collar slightly, and Clara caught a fuller glimpse of the tattoo coiling around his neck, an intricate dragon rendered in expert detail. "Miss Baptiste," he said calmly, "I'm going to ask you something unusual." Clara's blood turned cold. "How do you know my name?" "I make it a point to learn the names of people who save my life before they understand what they've done," he replied, his voice carrying an edge of something dangerous and honest. Her pulse roared in her ears. "Who are you?" she demanded again, her voice sharper now. He exhaled once, a sound that carried the weight of revelation and consequence. "My name is Yejun Park." The world tilted. Everyone in the city knew that name, even if they never spoke it aloud. It was whispered in certain circles, uttered with respect by those who understood real power. Yejun Park controlled the Korean Jangmun organization. He was the ghost who moved through the city's underworld like smoke through water, visible only when he chose to be, and lethal when crossed. Clara swallowed hard. "You're that Yejun Park. The one who runs the Southern Territories. The one even the other families don't challenge." "Yes," he confirmed simply. "Which means those men behind us came here specifically to end me tonight." She stared at him, her mind reeling between disbelief and the surreal reality of pulling a Mafia kingpin out of an assassination attempt. "And you're calm about this?" His expression remained composed, but she saw the steel underneath. "I adjust to circumstances. It's how I've survived this long." "Adjust faster," Clara snapped, her survival instincts overriding any awe she might feel. "Because they're spreading out into a containment formation." Yejun looked where she indicated. She was right. 3 men moving left, 3 right, 2 in the center. Classic killbox pattern. No amateur could execute it this cleanly. "This was coordinated," he said quietly, his tactical mind engaging fully. "Someone sold my location." "Someone close to you," Clara said before she could stop herself, then immediately wondered if she'd crossed a line. Yejun turned sharply, and for the first time genuine alarm flickered across his carefully controlled features. "You're certain? People don't ambush ghosts unless they know exactly where the ghost will be," Clara said, her voice gaining confidence despite the danger. "Someone tipped them off. Someone who knows your patterns and schedule." He stared at her like she'd just illuminated a truth that had been gnawing at him for weeks. His organization was tight, carefully vetted, built on loyalty and blood. But someone had betrayed him tonight. Someone inside his circle. "Miss Baptiste," he said softly, his voice carrying a weight that made her shiver despite the summer heat. "Would you like to live through the next 5 minutes?" Clara raised an eyebrow, some of her natural defiance surfacing despite the guns she knew were hidden under those men's jackets. "That's an insulting question." Then she grabbed his wrist, the untouchable Korean Mafia boss, and pulled him toward a narrow service alley she'd used 100 times to avoid trouble. "This way. The cars can't follow, and there's a route through the buildings that only locals know. They'll expect you to run toward the main street. We're going the opposite direction." Yejun let her lead without resistance, his hand warm under her grip, his expensive shoes suddenly vulnerable on the broken glass and uneven pavement that Clara navigated by instinct alone. Behind them, someone shouted, Footsteps began to run. But Clara was already 3 moves ahead, pulling him through a gap in a chain-link fence that led to a condemned building's basement access, a route she'd memorized years ago when survival meant knowing every exit from every situation. As they disappeared into the darkness, Yejun Park, feared leader of one of the city's most powerful crime families, followed the guidance of a poor girl from a forgotten neighborhood. Because in that moment, she was the only person in the entire city who truly knew how to survive. The first bullet punched through the air where Yejun's head had been 3 seconds earlier. Clara didn't wait to explain. She yanked him sideways with strength born from desperation, her worn sneakers finding purchase on pavement she'd walked 1,000 nights. His expensive shoes slipped, but her grip held firm. Move! The word tore from her throat as muzzle flashes painted the darkness in violent orange bursts. She pulled him into the mouth of an alley so narrow his shoulders scraped both walls. Behind them, car doors slammed. Footsteps multiplied. Voices barked commands in Korean, efficient, coordinated, lethal. These weren't street thugs. These were professionals executing a carefully designed execution. Clara's mind mapped routes while her body moved on instinct, left through the gap between the bodega and the burned-out apartment building. Over the chain-link fence with the bent corner post, the one she'd used to escape Marcus's crew last summer. Through Mrs. Chen's back garden where the motion light had been broken for months. Where are you? Yejun started, his voice controlled despite the chaos.
Don't talk.
Just trust me. She felt him hesitate, this man in a suit that cost more than her entire year's rent. Then his hand found hers, and he followed. They vaulted a low wall into the alley behind the closed dry cleaner. Clara dropped to her knees at a basement window she'd pried loose years ago, when sleeping rough meant finding creative shelter. She pushed it open and slid through, years of practice making her movements fluid. Yejun struggled with his larger frame, his tailored jacket catching on the frame, but he made it. The basement smelled like mildew and forgotten laundry. Clara navigated through the darkness, with the certainty of someone who'd memorized every obstacle. Behind them, shouts echoed from the street. Flashlight beams cut through the window they'd entered. This way. She found the maintenance tunnel connecting to the adjacent building, a passage only locals knew existed. They crawled through, emerged in another basement, climbed stairs to a ground-floor exit, and spilled into a different alley entirely. 3 more turns. 2 more fences. 1 mad sprint across an empty lot. Finally, Clara pulled him into an abandoned warehouse at the edge of her neighborhood, a place she'd used as shelter during her worst nights. The gunfire had faded to distant echoes. The shouting had stopped. They'd lost their pursuers in a labyrinth only she could navigate. She collapsed against a concrete pillar, chest heaving, adrenaline making her hands shake. Yejun remained standing, his breathing barely elevated despite their desperate flight. He straightened his torn jacket with movements that spoke of ingrained discipline, his dark eyes assessing the space with tactical precision before settling on her. The silence stretched between them, thick with unasked questions. Then he spoke, his accented English precise and measured, and Clara heard something she'd never expected to hear directed at her. Genuine respect. How did you know? Clara met his gaze, this stranger she'd just saved from death, and recognized something dangerous in the way he looked at her. Not gratitude. Not debt. Recognition. Like he'd discovered something valuable he hadn't known existed. The cars, she said, still catching her breath. Wrong neighborhood. Right formation. Nobody parks like that unless they're boxing someone in. She wiped sweat from her forehead. You were walking into a kill zone. Yejun studied her for a long moment, and Clara felt weighed, measured, evaluated by someone who'd clearly spent a lifetime reading people. What's your name? Clara Baptiste. She pushed off the pillar, suddenly aware of how she must look. Worn clothes, scuffed shoes, exhaustion written in every line of her body. Who the hell are you that someone wants you dead that badly? His slight smile held no humor. Someone who just realized he owes his life to a stranger with extraordinary instincts. He extended his hand, formal despite their circumstances. Yejun Park. Clara shook it, feeling calluses that matched her own despite his obvious wealth. Something shifted in that moment of contact, a connection forming between two people from completely different worlds who just survived the same nightmare. She had no idea she'd just saved the most dangerous man in the city. And he had no idea he'd just found his most valuable asset. Clara watched Yejun pull out his phone, the screen illuminating his face in the warehouse darkness. His fingers moved with practiced efficiency, sending messages that generated immediate responses. Within seconds, his phone buzzed with controlled urgency. People mobilizing, resources deploying, an entire invisible machinery springing to life at his command. "Your people looking for you?" Clara asked, wrapping her arms around herself against the night chill seeping through broken windows. "Finding me," he corrected, pocketing the phone. "We have 20 minutes before they arrive. That gives us time to talk." Something in his tone made Clara's instincts flare. This wasn't casual conversation. This was negotiation. She'd heard that particular cadence before, usually right before someone tried to own a piece of her. "You should know who you saved tonight," Yejun continued, his gaze steady and unflinching. "My name is Yejun Park. I run the Jangmun organization. Do you know what that means?" Clara's stomach dropped. Everyone in the city knew that name, even if they pretended not to. The Korean crime family that controlled half the waterfront, the gambling operations, the protection networks that extended through a dozen neighborhoods like invisible spider webs. Legitimate businesses fronting for an empire built on violence and absolute control. "Jesus Christ," she breathed, taking an involuntary step back. "I saved a goddamn mafia boss." "You saved someone who has a security detail worth 6 figures annually," Yejun said, and she heard something unexpected in his voice, frustration mixed with genuine curiosity. 8 trained professionals whose only job is keeping me alive. They missed what you saw in 3 seconds from across the street." Clara's mind raced, recalculating everything. The precision of the ambush. The professional execution. This wasn't random street violence. This was warfare between powers she couldn't begin to comprehend. "Why are you telling me this?" Her voice came out harder than intended. "People like you don't let people like me walk away knowing things." "People like me?" Yejun tilted his head slightly. "What am I like, Clara Baptiste?" "Dangerous.
Rich.
Connected." She met his eyes despite her fear. The kind of dangerous that disappears problems. True. He didn't deny it, and Clara respected that more than false reassurance. "But you're not a problem. You're something I didn't know I needed until tonight." He moved closer, not threatening but intent, and Clara forced herself to stand her ground. "My entire security apparatus failed," Yejun said. "Analysts, intelligence networks, surveillance systems, millions of dollars in protection that meant nothing." But a young woman carrying groceries saw the pattern instantly. "That's not luck, Clara. That's instinct refined by necessity. That's intelligence shaped by survival. That's tactical genius wearing poverty's disguise." Clara's breath caught. No one had ever called her intelligent. Street smart, maybe.
Scrappy.
A survivor. But genius? That word belonged to people who went to universities, not girls who'd learned strategy by dodging predators and navigating systems designed to crush them. "I have dozens of advisors," Yejun continued. "Harvard graduates, military veterans, people with credentials and pedigrees. But none of them see what you see. None of them think like you think. And tonight proved that perspective is more valuable than any degree." "What are you asking?" Clara whispered, though she already knew. "Work with me. Use that mind for something bigger than survival." Yejun's expression remained neutral, but his eyes held an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "I can offer you resources, protection, compensation. But more than that, I can offer you purpose. A place where your intelligence isn't wasted just keeping you alive another day." Clara looked around the warehouse, at the corner where she'd slept during her worst weeks, at the broken windows she'd memorized, at the life she'd been grinding through with no hope of escape. Then she looked at this man who'd walked into her world by accident and was offering her a door into his. Every survival instinct screamed that this was dangerous. That entering his world meant leaving behind any chance at normal. That once you stepped into the underworld, you didn't step back out. But she'd never had normal anyway. And invisibility was its own kind of death. "If I do this," Clara said slowly, "I'm not your charity case. I'm not some project to make you feel good about yourself. If you want my mind, you respect what it's worth." Yejun's smile was slight but genuine. "I wouldn't expect anything less." Outside, the sound of approaching vehicles rumbled through the night. His people, arriving to collect their king. Clara Baptiste took a breath and stepped through the door that would change everything. "Then I'm in." The penthouse conference room felt like a museum Clara wasn't supposed to touch. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, leather chairs surrounded a table that probably cost more than most cars, and 6 pairs of eyes studied her with varying degrees of hostility. "This is Clara Baptiste," Yejun said, his tone allowing no argument. "She'll be consulting on security and operations." David Kim, head of security, didn't bother hiding his contempt. "With all due respect, sir, she has no credentials, no training, no." "She saw what you missed," Yejun interrupted quietly. "Continue." Clara forced herself to sit, acutely aware of her thrift store blazer among their tailored suits. For 2 weeks, Yejun had been testing her, showing her operational maps, security protocols, business proposals. Each time, she'd pointed out things his experts had overlooked. Like now. She studied the warehouse security schematic David had just presented and saw the flaw immediately. "Your cameras cover the perimeter," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, "but you've got a blind spot where the east fence meets the loading dock. Someone familiar with the property could slip through there, especially during shift changes when your guards rotate." David's jaw tightened. "That's accounted for in our patrol patterns." "Patterns are predictable." Clara met his glare. "I could time your patrols from across the street with a stopwatch. So can anyone else watching. You need randomization, not routine." Jennifer Park, head of operations, leaned forward with a tight smile. "And you learned this where exactly?" "Security consulting school." "I learned it sleeping in places I wasn't supposed to be," Clara shot back. "You learn real fast how guards think when your survival depends on being invisible." The room went silent. Clara felt her cheeks burn, hating how her past became ammunition for their judgment. She started to stand, ready to walk out with whatever dignity remained. "She's right," Yejun said, still studying the schematic. "David, implement her suggestions. Add randomization protocols to all patrol rotations by week's end." Over the following weeks, the pattern repeated. Clara would identify weaknesses in money transfers, shipping routes, protection arrangements. His team would bristle. Yejun would implement her recommendations. And Clara would retreat to the small apartment he'd provided, staring at herself in the mirror and wondering when they'd realize she was just a fraud playing dress-up. Then came the Wednesday morning meeting where she studied the shipping manifests and felt ice slide down her spine. "Something's wrong with the waterfront warehouse," she said abruptly, interrupting a discussion about quarterly profits. Thomas Lee, logistics coordinator, sighed audibly. "The shipment is secure. We have standard protection in place." "When's it arriving?" "Saturday night." "Why?" Clara couldn't articulate it, just the wrongness of timing, the vulnerability of the location, the way everything aligned too perfectly for coincidence. "Move it. Different warehouse, different night." "That's impossible," Thomas snapped. "Do you have any idea what rescheduling costs? We have buyers waiting, distribution scheduled." "Move it," Yejun said, his eyes on Clara. Friday morning. Warehouse 7. Thomas's face reddened. "Sir, this is absurd. We can't restructure an entire operation because she has a feeling." "We can and we will." Friday came and went. Saturday morning, Clara's phone exploded with messages. She arrived at the penthouse to find the conference room packed, everyone gathered around a laptop showing news footage. The waterfront warehouse, the original location, was a smoking crater. Fire crews were still battling flames. Police swarmed the scene. If Yejun's shipment had been there as planned, they would have lost everything. Millions in product. Dozens of people. The entire operation. Clara stood frozen in the doorway as the room turned to look at her. David Kim stood slowly, his expression unreadable. Then he gave her a slight nod, the first gesture of respect he'd offered. "How did you know?" "I didn't," Clara admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just felt it. The timing was too convenient. The location too expected. Like someone was counting on us following our pattern." "Instinct," Yejun said quietly, and something in his tone made her look up.
"Bride."
He was proud of her. Jennifer Park closed her laptop with careful precision. That instinct just saved us from catastrophe. The room's energy shifted, not to warmth, not to friendship, but to grudging acknowledgement. Clara Baptiste might not have their credentials or their pedigrees, but she'd just proven something none of them could deny. She belonged at this table, and she was just getting started. The attacks came like thunder, sudden, loud, and from every direction at once. On Monday, 3 of Yejun's distribution centers were hit simultaneously. Professional crews, in and out in minutes, taking nothing but creating maximum disruption. On Tuesday, the police raided 2 of his legitimate restaurants, claiming anonymous tips about health violations and money laundering. The raids yielded nothing, but the media coverage was devastating. By Wednesday, news outlets across the city were running coordinated stories questioning Yejun Park's leadership, citing unnamed sources within his own organization. Clara watched the chaos unfold from the penthouse war room, where Yejun's team scrambled to plug holes in a dam that kept springing new leaks. "We need to reinforce security at all remaining warehouses," David insisted, pointing at a map covered in red markers. "They're targeting our supply chain." "The legal exposure is more critical," Jennifer countered. "If the feds get involved." "The media narrative is destroying our political relationships," Thomas interrupted. "We're losing protection we've maintained for years." Yejun stood at the window, his silence more unnerving than any outburst. Clara had learned to read his moods over the past months. Right now, he was calculating, processing, trying to find the pattern in the chaos. But they were all looking at the pieces wrong. Clara spread out newspapers across the conference table, then pulled up news sites on her laptop, creating a timeline on the whiteboard that dominated one wall. The team's arguments faded as they noticed her movements. "It's not random," she said quietly, adding dates and incident types to her timeline. "Look at the sequence." She drew lines connecting events, her hand moving with growing certainty. Monday's warehouse hits weren't about stealing product, they were about proving your security is vulnerable. Tuesday's raids weren't about finding evidence, they were about making you look guilty to legitimate partners. Wednesday's media blitz wasn't about truth, it was about isolating you socially. Yejun turned from the window, his full attention now on her work. "This is systematic dismantling," Clara continued, her voice gaining strength. "Whoever's doing this isn't trying to destroy you in one hit. They're eroding your foundation piece by piece. Economic credibility, legal standing, political protection, social legitimacy. They're removing every pillar that holds up your empire before they bring down the roof." "The Huang family," Yejun said flatly. Clara nodded. She'd done her research on the Huangs, the rival Korean organization that had been circling Yejun's territory for years. Huang Taesung was old-school ruthless, but his son Min-jae had studied modern warfare. This had his fingerprints all over it. "It's sophisticated," she admitted, adding more connections to her diagram. "Military-grade strategy. They're not fighting you like gangsters, they're fighting you like generals. Coordinated, multi-front assault designed to overwhelm your response capabilities." David studied her timeline, his expression darkening. "If you're right, what's the endgame?" Clara tapped the whiteboard where all her lines converged on a single point 2 weeks in the future. "They're building toward something. All this chaos is preparation. Once you're isolated enough, destabilized enough, they'll make their real move." "How do we counter it?" Jennifer asked, and Clara noticed the shift, no longer questioning her analysis, but seeking her solution. "We stopped playing defense," Clara said, meeting Yejun's eyes. "Right now, we're reacting to every attack, spreading resources thin, trying to protect everything. That's exactly what they want." We're fighting their war on their terms. She circled a section of her timeline. But they're following a pattern, which means they're predictable. They have to be coordination. This complex requires planning. If we can identify their next move, we stop reacting and start anticipating. Yejun moved to the table, studying her work with an intensity that made the room fall silent. His finger traced her connecting lines, following her logic, seeing what she saw. You're talking about turning their strategy against them, he said. I'm talking about proving that street fighting beats textbook warfare, Clara corrected. They plan this like a chess game. But I grew up where survival meant thinking 3 moves ahead while pretending you couldn't see the board. Thomas shook his head slowly, but there was no contempt in it now. Only wary respect. That's incredibly risky. So, is waiting for them to finish destroying us piece by piece? Clara shot back. Yejun's hand came down on the table with quiet finality. What do you need? Clara felt the weight of every eye in the room. 2 months ago, she'd been invisible. Now she was proposing strategy to combat a sophisticated enemy that had brought down organizations before. Access to everything, she said. Financial records, security protocols, communication logs. If I'm going to predict their next move, I need to see the whole board. You'll have it within the hour, Yejun said. He looked at his assembled team, his trained professionals who'd spent careers building expertise. From this point forward, we operate on Clara's analysis. The Huangs think they're fighting a traditional war. Let's show them what happens when they underestimate the unconventional. As the team dispersed to their assignments, Yejun caught Clara's arm gently. You see something they don't, he said quietly. Something my expensive education and years of experience blinded me to. The Huangs are fighting with privilege and planning. You fight with something sharper, hunger and heart. Clara looked at the timeline she'd created, at the web of attacks that everyone else had seen as chaos, but she'd recognized as strategy. Then let's make them regret teaching me their game, she said. The war had begun. But now they had a weapon the Huangs never anticipated. Her. The ballroom glittered with a kind of wealth that made Clara's borrowed gown feel like a costume. Crystal chandeliers cast fractured light across tables where the city's most dangerous people pretended to be its most philanthropic. She recognized faces from intelligence reports, crime bosses wearing tuxedos, their empires hidden behind charitable foundations and legitimate business fronts. Yejun moved through the crowd with practiced ease, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries with men who'd kill him if the balance of power shifted. Clara stayed close, hyper-aware of every glance that lingered too long on her, every whispered conversation that stopped when she passed. She didn't belong here, and everyone knew it. The entertainment has arrived, a smooth voice said behind her. Clara turned to find Huang Minjae holding 2 glasses of red wine, his smile sharp enough to cut. He was younger than his father, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than her entire education. Everything about him screamed privilege, from his perfectly styled hair to the confidence of someone who'd never known real fear. Huang Minjae. He introduced himself, though they both knew she already knew who he was. I don't believe we've been properly introduced. You must be Mr. Park's assistant. The pause before assistant was deliberate, the implication clear. Around them, conversations quieted. People were watching now, sensing blood in the water. Consultant, Clara corrected, accepting the wine glass he offered. Clara Baptiste. Of course. Minjae's smile widened. I've heard so much about you. The girl from nowhere who's suddenly everywhere. It's quite the Cinderella story. He moved closer, and Clara's instincts flared. She saw it coming, the shift of his weight, the angle of his hand, but moving would make her look paranoid. So she stood still as Minjae's hand jerked with practiced clumsiness, sending his wine splashing across the front of her ivory gown. The room gasped. Clara looked down at the spreading red stain, at the ruined dress she'd been so careful with, and felt every eye in the ballroom on her. Oh, how clumsy of me, Minjae said, his voice dripping with false concern. I'm so sorry. Though I suppose you're used to wearing less expensive things? Perhaps this isn't as devastating for you as it would be for others here. Laughter rippled through nearby groups. This was the moment, the public humiliation designed to expose her as the fraud she secretly feared she was. The poor girl playing dress-up in a world that would never accept her. Clara felt the familiar weight of shame trying to settle on her shoulders. Then she remembered the warehouse fire, the timeline she'd mapped, the respect she'd earned through intelligence rather than inheritance. She looked up and smiled. "Actually, I'm more concerned about your timing," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the hushed ballroom. "Spilling wine on me the same week your family's shipping routes got mysteriously rerouted through the southern ports? That's quite the coincidence." Min Jae's smile froze. Clara took a step closer, lowering her voice just enough that people had to lean in to hear. "Almost as coincidental as your father's sudden interest in that waterfront property. What was the address again?" "The same building where the Leaf family stores their imports." She watched the color drain from Min Jae's face. That information was classified, buried in intelligence reports only Yejun's inner circle should know. By mentioning it casually, she was doing two things: proving she had access to the highest levels of information, and implying the Huangs had a leak somewhere in their organization. "I don't know what you're talking about," Min Jae said, but his voice had lost its smooth confidence. "Of course you don't." Clara set down her wine glass with deliberate care. "Just like you don't know about the payments to Councilman Rogers, or the shell company in Vancouver, or the very specific reason your family needed those legal raids to happen on Tuesday instead of Monday." The room had gone completely silent. Clara could feel the weight of powerful eyes reassessing her, recalculating who she was and what she represented. Min Jae's composure cracked. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Clara tilted her head. "Would you like me to keep going? Because I have 3 more coincidences that might interest the people here. Especially the ones whose operations your family has been quietly researching." She let that sink in, the suggestion that the Huangs were gathering intelligence on multiple families, that their war with Yejun might just be the beginning of larger ambitions. Min Jae's jaw clenched. He'd come to embarrass her, to expose her as Yejun's weakness. Instead, she'd turned his spotlight into her weapon, using his attack to demonstrate exactly how dangerous she was. "Excuse me," he said stiffly, turning away. "I need to find my father." As he retreated, conversations resumed around the ballroom, but the tone had changed. Clara felt the shift, from dismissal to wariness, from contempt to calculation. She found Yejun across the room, leaning against the bar. Their eyes met, and she saw something in his expression that made her breath catch. Not just pride. Not just approval. Something deeper, more dangerous, more real. Clara just turned her biggest weakness into her greatest weapon, but the Huangs aren't done yet, not even close. If you're invested in seeing how a girl from the streets outplays an entire crime family, subscribe now because the next move is going to blow your mind. He crossed the ballroom with measured steps, ignoring everyone trying to intercept him. When he reached her, he shrugged off his tuxedo jacket and draped it over her shoulders, covering the wine stain. "That," he said quietly, his voice for her alone, "was remarkable." "I ruined your jacket," Clara said, suddenly aware of how close he was standing. "You destroyed their strategy." His hand lingered on her shoulder. "Min Jae came to humiliate you. You made him afraid instead." "I might have made things worse."
"No."
Yejun's eyes held hers with an intensity that had nothing to do with strategy and everything to do with the current running between them. "You made them realize you're not my weakness. You're my edge." The ballroom continued spinning around them, but Clara felt the world narrow to just this moment, this man who saw her not as a project or a charity case, but as an equal, as something more. "Dance with me," Yejun said, offering his hand. And Clara, still wearing his jacket over her ruined gown, still riding the adrenaline of her victory, took it. Let them watch. Let them whisper. She'd just proven she belonged in this world. Now she was about to discover what else she might belong to. The city lights stretched endlessly beyond the penthouse windows, a galaxy of possibilities that felt both within reach and impossibly distant. Clara sat curled in the leather chair, files spread across her lap, but her attention had drifted from tactical analysis to the man across from her. Yejun had loosened his tie hours ago, rolled up his sleeves, traded his armor of formality for something more human. At 3 in the morning, strategy sessions had a way of becoming something else, confessions whispered in the space between exhaustion and honesty. "My father built this empire from nothing," Yejun said, staring into his whiskey. "He survived things I can't imagine, sacrificed everything for power. And now I carry the weight of his legacy. Knowing one wrong decision doesn't just affect me, it affects hundreds of people depending on this organization for survival." Clara set down her files. "That's a lonely kind of responsibility." "Yes." His eyes met hers. "Until recently." The air between them shifted, charged with everything they'd been carefully not saying for weeks. Since the gala, something had changed, professional respect deepening into magnetic pull, partnership bleeding into something that made Clara's heart race in ways that had nothing to do with danger. "I never told you how I ended up on that street," Clara said quietly. "The night we met." Yejun waited, giving her space to choose her words. "I'd been evicted that morning. 3rd time in 2 years. I was walking back from the food bank when I saw you." She traced the rim of her water glass. "I saved your life with groceries I got from charity. That's who I am, Yejun. Someone who barely survives, someone who sees what others miss," he interrupted gently. "Someone who turns disadvantage into advantage. Someone who survived a world designed to break her and came out brilliant." He crossed the room, sat on the edge of the coffee table facing her, close enough that she could see the faint scar above his eyebrow, the exhaustion he hid from everyone else. "You think your poverty makes you less," Yejun said. "I think it makes you sharper than anyone I've ever known." A knock interrupted the moment. A server entered with a fresh bottle of whiskey, placed it on the bar, and retreated with a small bow. Routine. Unremarkable. Except Clara caught the fractional hesitation in his movements, the microsecond of tension in his jaw, the way his eyes avoided direct contact. "Don't drink that," she said sharply. Yejun's hand stopped halfway to the bottle. "What?" Clara was already moving, grabbing the bottle by the neck with a cloth napkin. The server. His body language was wrong. Nervous. Guilty. She held the bottle to the light, examining the seal. "This has been opened and resealed. Look at the label. There's a slight bubble where the adhesive was reapplied." Yejun's expression went cold and lethal. He made a single phone call, speaking rapid Korean. Within minutes, security had the server in custody. Within an hour, they had confirmation. The whiskey had been laced with enough poison to kill within minutes, untraceable except by specialized autopsy. The Huangs had infiltrated his household, had gotten close enough to kill him in his own home. And Clara had saved him again. When security finally left them alone, Yejun crossed the room in 3 strides and kissed her. Not gentle, not tentative, desperate and grateful and inevitable. Clara's hands found his shirt, pulling him closer. Months of tension igniting into something that felt like falling and flying simultaneously. "You keep saving my life," he murmured against her lips. "Someone has to," she whispered back. They stood there, foreheads touching, breathing each other's air, until Clara's phone shattered the moment with insistent buzzing. The message was from a neighbor. "Community center on fire. Police everywhere." Clara's blood turned to ice. She pulled up local news on her laptop, Yejun reading over her shoulder. Her neighborhood, her community center where kids did homework and families got meals, engulfed in flames. And beneath that story, another. Mass evictions on her old block, families given 48 hours to vacate, legal notices from a shell company she recognized as a Huang front. "They're attacking my people," Clara breathed, her hands shaking. "They can't get to you, so they're destroying everything I love." Yejun's jaw clenched. "I'll send protection. Resources. We'll rebuild."
No.
Clara's voice cracked. "Don't you see? That's what they want. They're proving that loving me, trusting me, it makes you vulnerable. Every person I care about becomes a weapon they can use." She pulled away from him, wrapping her arms around herself. The kiss still burned on her lips, but now it tasted like ash and consequences. "This is the cost," she said quietly. In your world, love isn't strength. It's a target painted on everything you value. Yejun turned her to face him, his hands firm on her shoulders. Then we make them regret teaching us that lesson. They want to break your focus by hurting your community? We'll use that rage to destroy them completely. Yejun. I'm not letting you go, Clara. And I'm not letting them win. His eyes held a promise and a threat. They just made this personal. They have no idea what they've unleashed. Clara looked at this man who'd become everything she couldn't afford. Partner, protector, and now something infinitely more dangerous. Love in the underworld wasn't a fairy tale. It was ammunition. But as Yejun pulled her close again, as she let herself lean into his strength while her neighborhood burned, Clara made a decision. If the Huangs wanted war, she'd give them war. And she'd make them pay for every family they displaced, every dream they destroyed, every person she loved that they dared to threaten. This wasn't just business anymore. This was personal. Clara's phone exploded at 6 a.m. with notifications that wouldn't stop. Text messages, calls, social media alerts, a digital avalanche that made her stomach drop before she'd even looked at the screen. The first headline made her nauseous. From streets to sheets, Mafia bosses' ghetto romance. Below it, photos. Dozens of them. Her and Yejun leaving the Italian restaurant last week. Getting into his car outside the penthouse. His hand on her lower back at a business meeting. One particularly intimate shot caught them on his balcony, foreheads together, completely unguarded. Every major outlet in the city had published simultaneously, coordinated, deliberate, devastating. Clara scrolled through article after article, each one more vicious than the last. They dug into her history, the evictions, the food banks, the nights she'd slept rough. They painted her as a gold digger, a manipulator, a ghetto Cinderella, using her body to climb into a world where she didn't belong. The comment section was worse. Racist vitriol, sexual degradation, threats specific enough to make her hands shake. How can Park lead when he's thinking with what's below his belt? She's a distraction wrapped in poverty. He's compromised. The mighty Jiangmun organization brought down by a hood rat. Yejun appeared in her doorway, already dressed despite the early hour, his phone in hand. His expression was controlled fury, barely contained. Don't read the comments, he said quietly. Too late. Clara set down her phone before she threw it. They're destroying us. Destroying you. They're trying to. He crossed to her, but she stepped back. Your own people are questioning you now. I saw the internal messages. Clara gestured at her laptop, where she'd been monitoring organizational communications. David thinks you're compromised. Jennifer thinks I'm a liability. Half your lieutenants are wondering if you've lost your edge. Half my lieutenants are fools. They're right, though. Clara's voice cracked despite her effort to stay steady. I am a liability. The Huangs are using me to undermine everything you've built. Look at what they're doing, making you look weak, distracted, emotional. Making me look like... Like what? Like someone I care about. Yejun's voice was sharp. Because I do, Clara. And I'm not apologizing for it. You should. She turned away, unable to meet his eyes. In your world, this is weakness. Clara forced herself to focus past the humiliation, past the rage, to see the pattern. The Huangs had been escalating systematically, physical attacks, economic pressure, community intimidation. Now public exposure. Each step designed to erode Yejun's foundation. Which meant this wasn't the endgame. This was set up. She opened her laptop and started cross-referencing the media outlets that had published the photos. Shell companies owned 3 of them. 2 more had recently received mysterious capital injections. All the money traced back to Huang family interests. Then she found it, buried in scheduling documents she'd hacked from the 5 family council's administrative server. A formal petition filed yesterday morning, hours before the photos went public. They're calling a council, Clara said, her voice hollow. Yejun went still. When? Next week. Emergency session. She turned the laptop so he could see. The Huangs are formally requesting your removal as head of the Jiangmun organization. Grounds, compromised judgment, operational instability, and leadership failure. The Five-Family Council was the ultimate authority in the city's underworld, the heads of all major crime families convening to settle disputes and maintain balance. Their decisions were absolute. If they voted to remove Yejun, he'd be exiled or executed. His organization would be dissolved, absorbed by rivals. The photos are evidence, Clara continued, the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. They're framing our relationship as proof you're unfit to lead. Emotional, distracted, making decisions based on sentiment rather than strategy. And the timing, right after the poisoning attempt, the community attacks, all of it. They're building a narrative that you're losing control. Yejun studied the petition, his expression unreadable. This was always their plan. Everything else was just preparation for this moment. They're going to argue you've become a liability to the entire council, that your personal entanglements threaten the stability they're all depending on. Clara felt the walls closing in. And they're right. I am your weakness now. The Huangs turned me into a weapon against you.
No.
Yejun's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. They gave us exactly what we need. Clara looked up confused. They've overplayed their hand, he continued, a dangerous smile forming. By calling the council, they've given us a stage. A chance to expose their strategy in front of everyone who matters. They think they're putting me on trial. But trials work both ways. Yejun, they have evidence, momentum, public opinion. They have assumptions. He cupped her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. But we have something better. We have you. The brilliant strategist they keep underestimating because they can't see past where you came from. Clara's mind raced. The council meeting was a trap, but it was also an opportunity. The Huangs would present their case, expecting Yejun to defend himself. But what if they went on offense instead? What if they used the council as the stage to destroy the Huangs completely? I need access to everything, Clara said, her voice steadying. Every piece of intelligence we have on the Huang family. Financial records, communication intercepts, business dealings. If we're going into that council chamber, we're not going to defend. We're going to annihilate. Yejun's smile widened. That's my girl. Clara returned to her laptop, already building the framework of their counterattack. The Huangs thought they'd won by exposing her relationship with Yejun, by painting her as his weakness. They had no idea she was about to become his most devastating weapon. The final battle was coming. And this time, the poor girl from the streets was going to teach the wealthy and powerful exactly what happens when they underestimate hunger, heart, and a mind sharpened by survival. The Castellano mansion had witnessed a century of blood, betrayal, and backroom deals. Its oak-paneled council chamber held a table where 5 chairs sat equidistant, neutral ground where the city's most powerful crime families maintained the delicate balance that kept all-out war at bay. Clara stood outside the heavy doors, clutching a single manila folder, while inside Yejun faced judgment. Through the crack, she heard Huang Taesung's voice, smooth and confident. Gentlemen, we gather because the Jiangmun organization has become unstable. Yejun Park's personal entanglements have compromised his judgment. The evidence is public, a relationship with someone completely unvetted, attacks escalating under his leadership, operations failing. He's become a liability to the balance we all depend on. The other family heads murmured agreement. Victor Castellano, the elderly Don who hosted these meetings. Dmitry Volkov, the Russian kingpin. James Chun, who controlled the southern territories. Marcus Williams, who ran the western operations. I move for his immediate removal, Huang continued. For the stability of us all. Before you vote, Yejun's voice cut through the room. Perhaps you should hear from someone who sees the situation more clearly than any of us. The doors swung open. Clara walked in, her cheap flats silent on expensive carpet, her thrift store suit a stark contrast to the wealth surrounding her. 5 of the most dangerous men in the city turned to stare at the poor black girl who'd just entered their sacred space uninvited. Who the hell is this? Volkov demanded. Clara Baptiste, she said clearly, setting her folder on the table. The woman you've all been reading about. The supposed weakness that proves Mr. Park is unfit to lead. Huang's smile was patronizing. Miss Baptiste, this is a private. I know what Huang Taesung has been doing for the past 18 months, Clara interrupted, opening her folder. And you all should know too, since he's been selling you out to the federal government. The room went deathly silent. Clara slid documents across the table, financial records, meeting transcripts, wire transfer receipts. March 14th, Huang met with FBI agent Richardson at the Harbor Point Hotel. He provided information on the Volkov family's shipping operations in exchange for immunity on the federal racketeering charges being built against his son. Volkov's face darkened as he scanned the document. May 2nd, another meeting. This time he traded details on the Chin family's distribution network. Clara's voice remained steady despite her racing heart. June 19th, information on the Williams territory expansion. July 8th, financial details on the Castellano legitimate business fronts. She produced photographs, Huang entering federal buildings, sitting across from agents in restaurants, exchanging envelopes. He's been systematically gathering intelligence on every family represented at this table, Clara continued. His attacks on the Jiangmun organization weren't about eliminating a rival. They were about removing the one leader smart enough to discover his betrayal. These are fabrications, Huang protested, but his voice had lost its confidence. The federal case files are real, Clara said. Your immunity agreement is real. Signed and notarized. Your plan to dismantle this entire council from within while the FBI builds cases against everyone here, that's real too. She pulled out the final document, Huang's own handwriting detailing his strategy to eliminate each family systematically once Yejun was removed. You used me as a weapon against Mr. Park, Clara said, meeting Huang's eyes. You exposed our relationship, called this council, presented evidence of his supposed weakness. But the real weakness was assuming a poor girl from the streets couldn't outthink you. Castellano studied the documents with the slow precision of someone who'd survived decades through careful calculation. These are authentic.
Impossible, Wang stammered.
Your signature. Your meetings. Your betrayal. Chen's voice was ice. The vote took 30 seconds. Unanimous. Immediate exile for the entire Huang family, forfeiture of all territories and assets. As security escorted a protesting Huang from the chamber, Clara gathered her folder. The 4 remaining family heads watched her with expressions that mixed wariness and reluctant respect. Yejun stood, his hand finding the small of her back. Gentlemen, I believe my judgment has been thoroughly vindicated. As they left the chamber, hardened criminals who'd ruled through violence and fear for decades nodded to Clara Baptiste, the girl who'd just rewritten the power structure with nothing but intelligence, courage, and a manila folder full of truth. Outside, Yejun turned to her, his eyes bright with something beyond victory. You just changed everything, he said quietly. Clara looked back at the mansion, at the world she'd infiltrated and conquered.
Good, she said.
It needed changing. 3 months after the council meeting, Clara stood on the corner of Morrison and Fifth, watching a construction crew frame what used to be the neighborhood's most notorious drug house. The building that had swallowed countless lives was being reborn as a community learning center, complete with computer labs, tutoring rooms, and a commercial kitchen for job training. Mrs. Chen's grandson starts the coding program next week, she told Yejun, who stood beside her in jeans and a simple jacket, no suit, no armor, just a man surveying work that mattered. How many enrolled total, he asked. 43 kids. Waiting list of 60 more. Clara checked her tablet, scrolling through programs they'd launched. The housing project on 7th is 90% occupied. All families vetted through the community board, rent set at actual affordable rates. The rec center opens next month. Yejun watched a group of teenagers walk past, backpacks slung over shoulders, heading home from school instead of corners. 6 months ago, half of them would have been foot soldiers for street dealers. Now, they were talking about college applications. The other families are watching, Yejun said. Castellano called yesterday. Asked how we're maintaining territory while investing in community infrastructure. Clara smiled. What did you tell him? that we're redefining what control looks like. He turned to face her. Protection doesn't have to mean exploitation. Power doesn't have to mean destruction. It had been Clara's vision, but Yejun's resources that made it possible. They'd systematically transformed her neighborhood, buying up abandoned properties, pressuring slumlords to sell, converting spaces of trauma into places of opportunity. The Jangmun organization's money, once purely criminal, now flowed through legitimate community development corporations. Crime hadn't disappeared. That would be naive. But it had changed. The street-level violence that had made this neighborhood a war zone had dropped by 60%. Kids who would have been recruited into gangs were learning skills that offered different futures. Families who'd faced constant eviction now had stable housing. "You know what people are calling us?" Clara asked, leaning against him. "What?" "The king and queen of the forgotten streets." She laughed. "Like we're some fairy tale." "We're better than a fairy tale," Yejun said, pulling her close. "Fairy tales are fiction. This is real." Their relationship had evolved from scandal to legend. The media that had tried to destroy them now chronicled their transformation. The mafia boss who'd learned empathy from poverty, the poor girl who'd taught power what responsibility looked like. Their engagement had made headlines, but this time the coverage focused on the community center dedication where Clara's old neighbors cheered alongside Yejun's organization members. David Kim approached, tablet in hand. He'd become an unexpected ally, his skepticism transformed into genuine respect after watching Clara's strategies succeed repeatedly. "Latest crime stats," he said, showing them graphs that trended steadily downward. Drug arrests down 40%. Violent crime down 62%. School attendance up. The model is working. "It's more than a model," Clara corrected. "It's proof that investing in people creates better protection than threatening them ever could." She looked at the street where she'd once dropped groceries while running to save a stranger. The streetlights were new now, bright and reliable. The bodega had expanded, hiring local teenagers. The corner where she'd slept rough during her worst nights was now a small garden with benches where elderly residents sat in the evenings. Yejun had given her resources, but Clara had given him purpose. His organization still operated in gray areas, gambling, protection services, import-export businesses that skirted legal lines. But the violence had become the exception rather than the rule. The exploitation had been replaced by something closer to genuine community partnership. "Victor Castellano wants to meet," Yejun said. "He's interested in applying our model to his territories." Clara raised her eyebrows. "The oldest crime family in the city wants to learn from us?" "They want to learn from you," Yejun corrected. "You've proven that power built on investment lasts longer than power built on fear." As the sun set over streets that were finally remembering safety, Clara took Yejun's hand. The poor girl and the mafia boss, standing at the intersection of everything they'd built together. "Think we can change the whole city?" she asked. Yejun smiled. "We already started." 5 years had changed everything and nothing. The city still breathed with its nocturnal rhythm, but the pulse at Morrison and Fifth beat differently now. Steadier, stronger, alive with possibility instead of danger. Clara stood at the intersection where her life had pivoted, Yejun beside her, their hands intertwined with the ease of partnership forged in fire and tempered by time. The worn sneakers she'd been wearing that night had long since been discarded, but she could still feel the phantom weight of dropped groceries, the surge of adrenaline when she'd recognized the kill box, the terror and certainty that had driven her to grab a stranger's arm. "Hard to believe it's been 5 years, she said, watching the new streetlights. LED, solar-powered, installed through the Community Improvement Fund they'd established, cast warm illumination across pavement that had once hidden in shadows. The bodega on the corner thrived under new ownership. The Rodriguez family, immigrants Clara had helped establish with microloans and business mentorship, had transformed it from a struggling corner store into a neighborhood hub. Through the windows, she could see Maria Rodriguez helping a customer, her teenage son stocking shelves while studying for his college entrance exams. Where Clara had dropped her groceries that night, a small memorial garden now grew. Stone benches surrounded a fountain inscribed with names: People lost to the street violence that had once defined this neighborhood. Fresh flowers always appeared there, tended by families who remembered, and a community determined not to forget. "You're thinking about that night," Yejun observed, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Always." Clara leaned into him, comfortable in a way her younger self could never have imagined. "I was terrified. Broke. Invisible. I'd just been evicted, was carrying charity groceries, and somehow thought I could save a man I didn't know from professional killers." "You did save him." "I saved both of us," Clara corrected. She looked up at Yejun, seeing how 5 years had changed him too. The hard edges of pure authority had softened into something more nuanced, strength tempered by wisdom, power wielded with purpose. He commanded respect not through fear, but through the transformation he'd helped architect. "You wear it differently now," she said. "The leadership. The power."
You taught me to.
Yejun's free hand gestured at the thriving street. "I thought control meant domination. You showed me it could mean cultivation instead." Clara had grown too, in ways that still surprised her when she caught her reflection. The imposter syndrome that had plagued her early days had transformed into quiet confidence. She no longer apologized for occupying space in rooms full of powerful people. Her intelligence, once dismissed as street luck, was now sought after by organizations across the city. Universities invited her to speak. Community leaders consulted her on development strategies. The poor girl from nowhere had become someone whose name carried weight. Their wedding bands caught the streetlight, simple platinum, inscribed with coordinates of this exact intersection. They'd married 2 years ago in a ceremony that brought together crime bosses and community activists, former enemies and new allies, the underworld and the neighborhood in an unprecedented gathering that symbolized everything they'd built. "You know what's funny?" Clara said, her voice soft with reflection. "I told you not to look back that night. Don't turn back. Those were my first words to you. But everything behind us, my poverty, your empire, that whole war with the Huangs, my trauma, your legacy, it all made this possible." She gestured at the transformed neighborhood, the community center where former gang members now mentored teenagers, the affordable housing where families could build stability instead of constantly fleeing eviction, the small businesses thriving with microloans and support, the children walking to school safely, dreaming futures that seemed achievable rather than impossible. "If I hadn't grown up here, I wouldn't have seen that ambush," Clara continued. "If you hadn't been exactly who you were, you couldn't have provided the resources to rebuild. Our pasts, the things we were running from or carrying, they were exactly what we needed to create something new." Yejun pulled her closer, his other arm wrapping around her waist. Around them, the neighborhood continued its evening rhythm. Mr. Washington locked up his barbershop, waving to them as he passed. A group of kids rode bikes down the street, laughing, staying out after dark because they could now. Mrs. Chin emerged from her garden apartment, carrying containers of food for the elderly woman next door.
Ordinai moments.
Normal life. The kind of safe, boring, beautiful routine that Clara had never known growing up, that Yejun's world of violence had seemed designed to destroy. They'd built this together, not by abandoning who they were, but by transforming what their strengths could create. "The council meeting is tomorrow," Yejun said. Castellano and Chin both want to discuss expanding the community investment model to their territories. Volkov is already implementing his own version. Clara smiled. 5 years ago, they wanted to exile you for being compromised by loving me. Now they're asking us to teach them how we did it. Not asking us. Asking you. Yejun's pride was palpable. You changed the entire power structure of the city, Clara. Not through violence or intimidation, but by proving there's a better way. She thought about the girl she'd been, desperate, invisible, surviving day by day with no vision beyond making it through another week. That girl would never have believed she'd end up here, married to one of the city's most powerful men, transforming neighborhoods, advising crime families on community development, building a legacy that mattered. "Then let's look forward," Clara said, echoing her words from that first night.
Together.
Yejun took her hand, and they walked down the street they'd run through in terror 5 years ago. Past the alley where bullets had shredded the darkness. Past the fence they'd vaulted in desperate flight. Past the spaces that had hidden them while death searched nearby. All of it transformed now. Not erased. The memorial garden ensured the pain would be remembered. But redeemed, rebuilt, given new meaning. The city continued its eternal rhythm around them, millions of lives intersecting in the vast urban ecosystem. But this corner, their corner, beat with a different pulse now. Not danger, but possibility. Not survival, but legacy. Not the end of something, but the beginning of everything. The poor girl and the Mafia boss had transformed each other. And in doing so, they transformed the world around them. One street, one life, one choice at a time. As they disappeared into the night, the new streetlights illuminated the intersection where destiny had collided with chance, where 4 words, "Don't turn back," had rewritten 2 lives and changed a city. Some stories end where they begin. The best ones never really end at all. They just keep transforming, keep growing, keep proving that the most powerful force in any world isn't violence or wealth or inherited power. It's 2 people who see each other's worth and decide to build something worthy of it. Together.